On my first wedding anniversary, my sister-in-law stormed in with a stunning, wealthy woman by her side, smirking as she declared, "Meet my brother's new wife." My world shattered as my unfaithful husband turned to me and sneered, "You poor, useless girl. You're nothing." Before I could react, he ordered the security guards to drag me out onto the freezing street. I sobbed, humiliated and abandoned, but as they celebrated inside, they had no clue the storm this new wife was about to unleash on them. By the next morning, their perfect world would begin to crumble. I always believed my life was on the right path. My name is Helen Green, and until recently I was living a dream, or so I thought. Let me take you back to where it all began. I was 29 years old, living in my family's home in suburban Chicago. It wasn't just a house. It was a symbol of everything I held dear. My parents built it with love, and every corner of it held a memory. When they passed away, I inherited the house. It was my sanctuary, a reminder of their warmth and guidance. When I met Ryan Green, I thought I'd found someone who understood me, someone who shared my dreams of building a life filled with love and trust. He was charming in his mid-30s, with a smile that could light up a room. I fell hard and fast. Within a year, we were married, and I welcomed him into the house I treasured so much. In the beginning, life seemed perfect. Ryan was attentive and supportive, or at least he appeared to be. But looking back now, I realized there were cracks I chose to ignore. One of the first was his relationship with his sister, Jessica Moore. She was in her early 40s, confident and commanding. Ryan seemed to hang on her every word. At first, I thought it was endearing, a sibling bond that close. But soon, I started to notice how her opinions often overruled mine, even in matters that were deeply personal to me. Jessica wasn't just opinionated, she was controlling. She visited frequently, and every time she stepped into the house, I could feel her eyes scanning every inch of it. She made comments about how it was too much for someone like me to handle and how I should think about letting her and Ryan help manage it. I brushed it off as her way of being protective of her brother, but deep down, I felt uneasy. It was as if she was measuring the house up for herself. Ryan, on the other hand, always assured me that he was on my side. "Don't worry about Jessica," he would say. "She just likes to be involved." I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. After all, I loved him. But as the months went on, Jessica's interference only grew. She started questioning my decisions, from how I decorated the house to how I managed the bills. What hurt the most was how Ryan would sometimes side with her, brushing my concerns aside like they didn't matter. Still, I tried to keep the peace. I told myself that marriage was about compromise and understanding. When Ryan suggested we celebrate our first wedding anniversary with a grand dinner party, I jumped at the idea. It felt like a chance to show everyone, including Jessica, that we were a strong and happy couple. I spent weeks planning every detail. The guest list was perfect, the menu carefully curated, and the house looked stunning. On the evening of the party, I stood in the living room, watching the guests arrive, feeling a rare sense of pride. For once, it felt like everything was coming together. Ryan was by my side, charming as ever, entertaining our friends and family. Jessica arrived fashionably late, as she often did, with her usual air of superiority. She gave me a quick, dismissive hug and immediately began critiquing the decorations. "Well, this is quaint," she said with a smirk. I smiled tightly, refusing to let her ruin the evening. As the night went on, I started to relax. The guests seemed to be enjoying themselves, and Ryan was unusually attentive. I began to think that maybe, just maybe, Jessica had been a test of my patience and we were finally past it. But then, just as we were about to cut the anniversary cake, everything fell apart. Jessica stormed into the center of the room, her voice sharp and cutting. "Stop this ridiculous charade," she shouted, her eyes locking onto mine. The room fell silent, and I could feel everyone's eyes on me. My heart raced as confusion and fear bubbled up inside me. "You're nothing but a liar and a cheat," Jessica spat. "You've been deceiving this family from the start. Tell them, Helen, about your secret lawyer and your so-called boyfriend."
"What?"
I stammered, utterly blindsided. That's not true.
What are you talking about?
Jessica's lips curled into a cold smile, and she turned to Ryan. Well, are you going to let her keep fooling everyone? Ryan, the man I had trusted with my heart, stepped forward. For a moment, I thought he might defend me, but instead, he said words I will never forget. She's right. I've had enough of this. Helen, this ends tonight. Before I could even process his betrayal, Ryan gestured to a young woman standing quietly in the corner. This is Lisa, he announced. She's everything you're not. Wealthy, successful, and honest. From now on, I'm with her. My knees felt weak, but Ryan wasn't finished. You're worthless, Helen. You don't belong here anymore. Security, he called, and within moments, 2 men appeared to escort me out. I tried to protest, but no one listened. My world crumbled as I was forced out of the house I loved into the cold Chicago night. I stood on the icy sidewalk, tears streaming down my face, trying to understand how everything I had built had been ripped away in an instant. Little did I know, this was only the beginning of my fight to reclaim what was mine. The cold air that night seemed to pierce through every layer of my skin. I stood on the sidewalk outside the house that had been my sanctuary, now filled with laughter and celebration for a life I had just been cut out of. I felt utterly alone, the betrayal cutting deeper with every breath. Ryan's words, "You're worthless," played over and over in my head. My knees buckled, and I sat on the curb, trembling and crying. How could the man I loved, the man I trusted, do this to me? I don't know how long I sat there before I heard a car pull up. I looked up to see a familiar face stepping out of the driver's seat. Helen, the man said cautiously, his voice warm but filled with concern. It took me a moment to place him. It was Ethan Cole, my college classmate. We had been close back then, but life had taken us in different directions. Seeing him now felt like a lifeline. Ethan's? I managed to whisper, barely able to speak through my tears. He knelt beside me, his eyes scanning my face. What happened? Are you okay? I couldn't hold back any longer. The whole story spilled out of me. The accusations, Ryan's betrayal, Jessica's scheming, and how they had taken over my home. Ethan listened intently, his expression shifting from concern to anger. When I finished, he gently helped me to my feet. You can't stay out here, he said firmly. Come on, let's get you somewhere warm. Ethan took me to his apartment on the other side of the city. It was modest but cozy, a stark contrast to the grand house I had been thrown out of. He handed me a blanket and made me a cup of tea, his movements calm and reassuring. You're safe here, he said. Take your time. As I sipped the tea, my mind raced. Everything had happened so fast, I could barely process it. The man I had loved and trusted had turned against me. His sister, who had been meddling in my life from the start, had orchestrated it all. And now, they were living in my home, celebrating their victory while I was left with nothing. Ethan, I said, my voice trembling. I don't know what to do. They've taken everything from me. That house, it's all I have left of my parents. He nodded, his jaw tight. We're going to fix this, Helen. You're not alone in this. Ethan's words were like a spark of hope in the darkness. Over the next few days, he helped me piece together a plan. As a lawyer, he knew the importance of evidence, and he believed there was more to Jessica and Ryan's actions than just greed. People like them don't just stop at one victim, he said. We need to find out what they're hiding. Ethan hired a private investigator, a man named Tom Hastings. Tom was in his late 40s, gruff but efficient. Don't worry, he said when we met. I've handled cases like this before. If there's dirt to be found, I'll find it. While Tom worked on gathering evidence, Ethan helped me stay focused. He encouraged me to document everything I could remember about Ryan and Jessica's behavior, their finances, and their interactions with others. It was painful to relive the memories, but it also gave me a sense of purpose. For the first time since that awful night, I felt like I was taking control of my life again. It didn't take long for Tom to uncover some shocking truths. Jessica and Ryan weren't just manipulative, they were criminals. They had a history of targeting wealthy or financially independent women, gaining their trust and then stripping them of their assets. Tom found records of gambling debts, fraudulent business deals, and even false identities used to cover their tracks. The young woman Ryan had introduced at the party, Lisa, was their latest target. She was wealthy, yes, but she had no idea she was being used. Ethan was furious when he heard the details. "They've done this to other women," he said, his voice cold with anger. "And they thought they could get away with it again." As Tom dug deeper, he found concrete evidence linking Jessica and Ryan to multiple fraudulent activities. Bank records showed they had drained funds from previous victims to fuel their gambling habits. Fake documents revealed how they manipulated ownership of properties, including my house. It was all there in black and white. When Ethan showed me the files, my hands shook.
"This is it," he said.
"This is the proof we need to bring them down." Despite the overwhelming evidence, I felt a pang of fear. Taking legal action meant going up against the people who had already destroyed so much of my life. But Ethan was determined. "Helen, you deserve justice. They can't keep getting away with this." I nodded, trying to summon the courage I knew I would need. "Okay," I said. "Let's do it." The first step was filing a lawsuit. Ethan worked tirelessly, drafting the case and ensuring every detail was accounted for. The legal process was daunting, but with Ethan by my side, I felt a glimmer of hope. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to imagine a future where I reclaimed not just my house, but my life. As we prepared for court, the reality of what was at stake weighed heavily on me. But with Ethan's support and Tom's evidence, I began to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could win. The weeks leading up to the court case felt like a blur. I poured every ounce of strength I had into preparing for the fight ahead. Ethan was my rock during this time, working tirelessly to ensure our case was ironclad. I watched him draft documents late into the night, consult with experts, and strategize every possible angle. His determination inspired me, and for the first time since that awful night, I felt a sense of control returning to my life. I still remember the morning of the trial. My stomach was in knots, and my hands trembled as I got ready. Ethan noticed my unease. "You've got this, Helen," he said gently. "Remember, we have the truth on our side." As we arrived at the courthouse in downtown Chicago, I saw Ryan and Jessica waiting outside. Ryan looked smug, his arm draped around Lisa, the woman he had introduced as his new partner. Jessica's eyes locked onto mine with a cold, calculating stare. My heart raced, but I stood tall, refusing to let them see how much they had hurt me. When the trial began, the courtroom was filled with tension. Ethan presented our case with precision and clarity, laying out the evidence Tom had gathered. Bank records, fraudulent documents, and testimonies painted a damning picture of Ryan and Jessica's schemes. It was almost surreal hearing the details laid out so plainly: their gambling debts, their manipulation of women, and the lengths they had gone to seize control of my home. Jessica, true to form, tried to spin her own narrative when it was her turn to speak. "This is all a misunderstanding," she said with feigned innocence. "We only wanted to help Helen manage the property. She's always been emotional." Hearing her twist the truth made my blood boil, but Ethan was ready for her. He presented irrefutable evidence that tied her to the fraudulent activities, leaving no room for doubt. "Your help included forging documents to transfer ownership of Helen's home to yourself," Ethan said, his voice steady but sharp. "Do you deny this?" Jessica faltered, her confident facade cracking for the first time. Ryan, on the other hand, seemed less composed. As the evidence piled up, his smug demeanor faded. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, avoiding eye contact with everyone in the room. One of the most pivotal moments came when Lisa, the woman Ryan had left me for, took the stand. To my surprise, she revealed that she had no idea about Ryan and Jessica's schemes. "I trusted him," she said, her voice shaking. "He told me Helen was unstable and that the house was his. I didn't know I was being used." Her testimony was powerful, and it exposed the depths of Ryan's deceit. I felt a mix of emotions: anger at how easily he had manipulated her, and gratitude that she had chosen to speak the truth. As the trial progressed, It became clear that Ryan and Jessica had no defense. The evidence was overwhelming, and their lies unraveled with each passing moment. The judge listened intently, his expression stern, as Ethan delivered his final argument. "This case is about more than fraud or theft," Ethan said, his voice steady and firm. "It's about justice for a woman who was betrayed by the very people she trusted most. Helen deserves to reclaim not just her property, but her dignity." When the judge finally announced the verdict, I held my breath. Based on the evidence presented, the court finds Ryan Green and Jessica Moore guilty of multiple charges, including fraud, theft, and conspiracy. Both are sentenced to 12 years in prison. The room erupted in murmurs, but I barely heard them. Tears streamed down my face as the weight of everything I had endured finally lifted. The judge continued, "Furthermore, the court orders the immediate return of Helen Green's property, as it was wrongfully taken." Ryan and Jessica were led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, their faces pale and defeated. For the first time, I felt a sense of vindication. They had tried to destroy me, but in the end, they had destroyed themselves. Outside the courthouse, Ethan turned to me, his expression a mix of relief and pride. "It's over," he said softly. "You did it, Helen." "No," I replied, smiling through my tears. "We did it." For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. My home was mine again, and the people who had tried to take everything from me were finally facing the consequences of their actions. But more than that, I had found strength I never knew I had. With Ethan by my side, I knew this was only the beginning of a new chapter, one where I was in control of my own life. When I stepped back into my house for the first time after the court's decision, it felt both familiar and strange. The walls still held the memories of my parents, the love and warmth they had given me, but it also bore the scars of betrayal. Standing there, I realized this house wasn't just a place, it was a symbol of everything I had fought for. I walked through each room, taking in the silence. The grandeur Jessica had tried to claim for herself and the life Ryan had flaunted with Lisa now seemed hollow. But to me, this house was alive again, filled with possibility. It was mine, not because of a court order, but because I had refused to let them take away my dignity. Ethan came by later that evening to check on me. He carried a box of pizza and a bottle of wine, grinning as he held them up. "I thought you could use a low-key celebration." We sat on the floor of the living room, eating and laughing. It felt good, simple and genuine, something I hadn't felt in so long. Ethan had been my anchor through all of this, but now I saw him in a different light. He wasn't just my lawyer or my friend. He was someone who had believed in me when I had nothing left, and that meant more than I could ever express. Over the next few weeks, I focused on reclaiming the house as my own. I repainted the walls, replaced furniture that held painful memories, and added little touches that reflected who I was. It felt like I was finally breathing life back into a home that had been dormant for too long. Each change I made was a step toward reclaiming myself. Ethan continued to be a constant presence in my life. Whether it was helping me choose colors for the living room or encouraging me to take time for myself, he was always there. And as the days turned into weeks, our bond grew stronger. It wasn't just his kindness or his unwavering support, it was the way he saw me, not as someone broken, but as someone strong and capable. One afternoon, as we sat in the backyard, the garden bathed in sunlight, Ethan turned to me. "Helen, I've been meaning to ask you something." I raised an eyebrow, curious. "What is it?" He hesitated, then smiled. "What do you want for your future?" "I mean, now that everything's settled, what do you see for yourself?" The question caught me off guard, but it made me realize something important. For so long, I had been fighting first to save my marriage, then to reclaim my home, and finally to rebuild my life. But now I had the freedom to choose what I wanted. And as I looked at Ethan, I realized he was a big part of that future. "I want to live a life that's mine," I said slowly. "One where I'm not afraid to trust, to love, and to dream. And I want to build it with people who make me feel like I'm enough." Ethan's expression softened, and he reached for my hand. "Then let's build it together." His words hung in the air, and for a moment, I felt the weight of everything we'd been through. But as I looked into his eyes, I knew it wasn't just about what we had overcome, it was about what we could create together. Months later, in a small ceremony surrounded by friends who had stood by us, Ethan and I exchanged vows. It wasn't grand or extravagant, but it was perfect. In that moment, I realized my journey wasn't just about reclaiming what had been taken from me. It was about finding something even better. Today, as I sit in the home I fought so hard for, I can finally say I'm at peace. The road to get here wasn't easy, but it taught me the power of resilience and the importance of standing up for yourself. Ryan and Jessica tried to break me, but instead, they made me stronger. And with Ethan by my side, I'm ready to embrace the future, whatever it may bring.